Reading textbooks is one of those things in college that you all have to do and probably dread, but there are definitely some tips of the trade that can make it easier, more effective, and actually very useful in your success as a student. So let's talk through a few of the strategies. First of all, just overall tips. When you buy a book for a class, you have invested not only with your time and your money, so don't let money of selling back a book get in the way of you passing the class. Use the book, write in it, take notes in the margins, highlight and underline, or whatever it is that works best for your brain. I know when I was in college I used pencil because what I thought was important while I was reading the textbook prior to the lecture may not be what the instructor felt was important, and I liked being able to erase things that didn't line up, and so I would only then focus on what was important. So when you study, go back and just read over what you noted or highlighted. You don't have to read all the text again. That's just useless time, right? If you buy a used book that already has underlines or something, highlight in your own color, or maybe there's highlights all over the place, so use underlines for your own notes. It'll just sometimes help you determine what you feel is important versus the previous person. Sometimes the previous person was right on, and those highlights are very helpful. Sometimes the previous person highlighted paragraphs and paragraphs of text, and that's not going to be very helpful for you at all. There is a strategic textbook reading strategy, and this is the order in which you do it. Most people, when they open a textbook, just open up the assigned reading and read starting at page 1 through 30 or whatever, and just read, and usually fall asleep in the middle. So there is actually a strategic order of operations to read where it gives your brain the information to stick things to, so it will stick in your brain as you study, as you take tests, and putting all the pieces together. So the first thing you want to do is look at the table of contents. And you can do that at the beginning of the semester, but also maybe as you sit down to read a particular chapter, because the table of contents will probably list the headings. And so just by looking at that, you know what you're covering in that particular chapter. So you've got the table of contents first. Then the second, most textbooks give you a little paragraph introduction or synopsis of what's going to be talked about in the chapter. That gives you your important points, at least as an introduction to the important points. The third part is conclusion. So the same thing you do with the introduction, that gives you an initial overview. The conclusion gives you a synopsis at the end. After you've already read, right, all the important pieces, it puts all the important pieces together in one paragraph or two paragraphs. So if you do the table of contents, you've got the intro and the conclusion, you basically have the entire story of the chapter. And not that you can stop there, but that gives your brain the initial information that it needs to lock into what you're supposed to be learning as you read through the chapter. Next, end of chapter questions can definitely steer you to look for the particular pieces of information throughout the chapter as you read that might show up on a test in your exam, or in a pretest, or in a pop quiz, or at least the top main 10 points or whatever it is. If there is an end of chapter quiz or chapter questions, read over those. Then you can turn back to the front of the chapter, but do not start reading point. Read paragraph titles, so those bold headings. So read the titles, the headings throughout the entire chapter. Maybe even looking at graphs and pictures along the way, the bolded words, and let those kind of sink in as they relate to the paragraph titles or the bold headings. Once you do that, fill in gaps of your knowledge with the actual paragraphs. So you've already gone through the main points and the headings, and now what do you need to know about that particular heading? That's the filling in the gap part. As you fill in that gap, write down questions in the margins or on a piece of, as you take notes on a piece of paper next to your reading. that can inform class participation, or maybe essay topics, or things to bring to the class in discussion. So that is really a strategic textbook reading pattern. If you do that, you're engaged in the textbook reading. You're not just flat trying to get it in your brain, going word for word and missing half of it and having to reread and reread and reread. This is a very solid way to catch what you need to know, the important concepts, and also know how to fill in the gaps of your knowledge, because maybe you even already know some of the stuff from your lectures or whatnot. You don't have to read all the heavy text of a book to get what you need from your textbook reading. This is a picture of one of my statistics books when I was in my grad school program, and you can see here that I would read the paragraph and then in my own words summarize it. So here's this whole entire paragraph about what the mean is, and what I really needed to know for the test was that the mean is the arithmetic average, right? And here is the formula that I can use. But I didn't need to read all these words over and over as I was studying for my test. Here's another picture, and I think it's from the same textbook, or maybe a different textbook, I can't remember. I had so many. Again, this is me writing in the margins and looking at the critical review and saying, oh, I need to ask these own questions, of these writings, of my own writings. Sorry, these questions of my own writing as I go through what I'm reading. And you can see here, I only really have one point highlighted, and I have the term and then basically the definition of that term highlighted or underlined, so that I know where to look when I need to study those particular concepts. And you can see here I even had some little sticky notes or tabs that I could just flip to that particular topic when I needed to study about that topic. I also had a class where the instructor lectured straight from the textbook. And so a lot of the times I would just bring my book and write directly in the book when she was talking about a particular page in the book. Obviously this one we were talking about anxiety disorder, and so I underlined the things I thought, well actually I didn't even underline ahead of time. I read ahead of time, but knowing that she was going to be lecturing directly from it, when she mentioned something in class, in lecture, that's when I underlined it. And if it wasn't here, I wrote it in, because then I knew that it was really important to her, that it was in the book as well as what she said. And then I was able to reproduce what I needed on a test, because she, that particular instructor, used the book so heavily and just wanted me to know everything right on there. And I think this one was even open book exams at the end, and so it was really convenient to have it all on one page. You can also transfer class notes onto the page of the book that it applies to, or vice versa. Use things from the book and then apply that to your class notes page, so that when you are studying for your exam, you don't have to refer to multiple documents. You can just have everything in one spot, and it's really helpful. Reading novels is another challenge when you have to do it for school, right? Because you have to do it in an educational way rather than just an fun novel kind of way. Most of you have probably read this in your youth, Twilight by Stephenie Meyer, and this is a totally cheesy book. But anyways, the chart is here to explain kind of the process of reading a novel for school. So you break it down. You can develop a spreadsheet or just do it on paper, on notebook paper, and you put what chapter it is, the page numbers of the chapter, what the title of the chapter is if it has it. Some books are just chapter 1, then you could just eliminate that column. And then as you read the chapter, pick out the main ideas, the story or the plot development that happened in that particular chapter. Anybody you meet in that chapter. So new characters, maybe new places, new spaces, main terminology that you feel like is going to come in handy for an essay. Also, develop questions or things that might be your assignment. Like maybe you have an essay that's going to say, compare and contrast the relationship that Bella had with Edward Cullen and Jacob, and you're going to have to pick that thread throughout the entire book. And so that's where you would make these notes, or just even weird comments. Not weird comments, weird things, right? Like things that come up or things that you need explained, or again, for in-class discussion, points of participation. Now, when you're writing your essay or having to refer to something in particular, you have a chart that you can go back to and say, oh man, I need to talk about when Bella first met Edward, and talk about that crazy reaction that he had, so that then I can explain something that happened later in the book. Well, now I know exactly what pages to refer to. I know that was a question that I had initially from this chapter, so this would be a great place to find that information without having to reread the entire book. And so you go through the entire book that way. And then you can also put in notes, like let's say you come to a class lecture and the instructor mentions something in particular about a character or about a particular situation from the book. You know right where to include it in your notes, because you know it happened in these page numbers or in chapter 3, or you can even say, okay, this is where we meet Bella, and you can do a little side note over here. Note from instructor, Bella, da-da-da-da-da. So this is a super handy tool when you're dealing with novels and trying to write, intelligently about a fun book, or maybe even a hard book. Like, I don't know, what do you have to read? The Bean Trees. It's an awesome book, but there are some really deep concepts in there that are hard to trace if you're just, I could read that book in a day. But to remember it for an essay is really challenging. So hopefully this Reading for Novels tips will help you. And then lastly, your textbook has lots of tips. Identifying why you read is important. Why are you reading this particular book for this particular class? And if you can identify that and have some key points to remember, it'll help you motivate to do the reading. Then identifying your challenges will also help you, because maybe your challenge is reading for too long of blocks, and maybe you set a timer for 10 minutes and then come back to it 10 minutes later. Then it also gives you some strategies to improve a before reading situation, during reading, and then after your reading, and how to meld those together in your brain so you don't lose the concepts. And I think they even mentioned some of the textbook strategies that I mentioned already in this lecture. Hopefully this helps you be more effective in your textbook reading, and I look forward to hearing how it works for you.